CERN scientist opened door to another dimension. In 2012, now he returned 14 years later. In 2012, deep inside CERN, an experiment at the Large Hadron Collider produced signals no one could fully explain. By 2026, those same conditions are being recreated, this time on purpose. The 2012 experiment that shouldn't have happened. In 2012, inside CERN, scientists pushed the Large Hadron Collider to its highest energy levels during experiments focused on confirming the Higgs boson. The facility, located near Geneva, was already operating at the edge of known physics. During these high-energy collisions, detectors began recording unusual readings, energy signatures that did not behave according to standard particle models. Instead of following expected decay paths, some results showed irregular distributions that researchers struggled to classify. These anomalies were subtle, but consistent enough to draw attention within internal teams. Some physicists described the effect as a temporary instability in spacetime conditions, where energy interactions didn't fully match theoretical predictions. The data did not immediately suggest anything dramatic, but it didn't fit existing frameworks either. During that same period in July 2012, the focus remained on confirming the Higgs boson, and most public attention stayed there. However, within certain analysis groups, the unexplained signals were noted and discussed. They weren't dismissed, but they also weren't fully explained. What remained was a set of results that hinted at behavior beyond what current models could clearly define. The signal that didn't belong. As researchers reviewed collision data from 2012, they noticed patterns where energy didn't behave as expected. In standard particle physics, energy produced in collisions follows predictable decay chains, eventually stabilizing into known forms. But in some cases, the recorded data showed energy dispersing in ways that didn't align with these models. Some signals appeared to fade without completing expected decay paths, creating gaps in the measurable output. This drew comparisons to theoretical concepts involving extra dimensions, often discussed in advanced models of physics. Within internal discussions at CERN, these anomalies were treated cautiously. They were statistically significant enough to be flagged, but not strong enough to confirm a new discovery. Some physicists considered the possibility that the data reflected interactions not fully captured by current detection methods. Others suggested it could be noise or an artifact of extreme experimental conditions. The key detail was that the behavior repeated under similar setups, which made it harder to ignore. By late 2013, follow-up analysis continued, but the results remained inconclusive. The signals didn't provide clear answers, only indications that something in the system was not fully understood within existing theoretical boundaries. The scientist behind the incident. Within the aftermath of the 2012 data, a smaller group inside CERN began focusing on the unexplained anomalies rather than the confirmed Higgs results. Among them was a lead researcher involved in high-energy collision analysis, who became closely tied to the unusual findings. Reports from internal discussions suggest that, by 2013 analysis, this individual was attempting to recreate the exact conditions that produced the irregular energy behavior. The goal was not broad discovery, but precision, repeating the same setup to isolate what had happened. As this work continued, the interpretation of the anomaly began to shift. Instead of treating it as noise, the researcher explored whether the collider had briefly reached a boundary condition where known physical limits became unstable. This idea connected to theoretical models suggesting that under extreme energy, interactions could behave differently at very small scales. Within internal review processes at Geneva Labs, parts of this work were reportedly moved into more restricted channels, limiting wider discussion. At the same time, the researchers' presence in public-facing projects and publications began to decrease. By around 2014 reports, their name appeared less frequently in major collaborations, and the focus of their work became less visible externally. No formal explanation was given, but the timing aligned with ongoing analysis of the anomaly. What remains is a sequence where deeper investigation into a specific set of data coincided with reduced public visibility, leaving behind a gap between what was explored internally and what was shared more widely. The door theory emerges. Theoretical physics has long explored the idea that reality may include dimensions beyond the familiar three of space and one of time. These concepts, often discussed in advanced models, suggest that under certain conditions, space-time itself could behave in ways that are not normally observable. When researchers revisited the 2012 anomaly, some noted similarities to these models. In particular, the way energy appeared to deviate from expected decay paths resembled predictions where particles interact with higher dimensional spaces. By 2015 studies, discussions began linking the anomaly to scenarios where extreme energy levels could cause very small distortions in space-time structure. These distortions wouldn't form visible openings, but could create brief conditions where energy behaves differently, appearing to move outside measurable boundaries. This led to the idea of a microscale interaction rather than a physical portal. The behavior observed in CERN data did not match everyday physics, but it did align with theoretical outcomes predicted under highly specific conditions. The interpretation remained cautious. These models are complex and not fully confirmed, but the alignment between theory and observation was notable. What emerged was not a claim of something entering or leaving, but a possibility that under certain energy thresholds, interactions might extend beyond the limits currently understood. The anomaly became less about a single event and more about what it suggested, an indication that existing models may not fully describe every aspect of high-energy behavior. The silence after the discovery. After the breakthrough in July 2012, public attention at CERN remained focused on the Higgs boson, with little mention of any anomalies in the data. Official reports highlighted confirmed findings, while irregular energy signatures were left largely unaddressed. Within the research community, some internal papers connected to the anomaly were either delayed, unpublished, or revised before wider release. This created a noticeable gap between what was recorded in raw data and what appeared in formal publications. By 2013 reports, discussions around the unusual signals had become less visible in conferences and academic circles. The researcher previously linked to the anomaly also began to fade from major collaborations, with fewer appearances in published work. This absence wasn't explained publicly, but it coincided with the period when deeper analysis of the anomaly would have been ongoing. Inside facilities near Geneva, research continued, but without clear public updates on that specific line of investigation. The result was a silence that stood out. In a field where discoveries are typically shared and debated, the lack of follow-up raised questions within smaller circles of the scientific community. The anomaly was not disproven or confirmed. It was simply not addressed in detail. This left a space where data existed, but interpretation remained limited, creating uncertainty around what had actually been observed during that period. The 14-year gap. Between 2012 and 2026, the work at CERN continued to evolve, with upgrades to the Large Hadron Collider allowing experiments at even higher energy levels. During this time, theoretical research into extra dimensions and quantum behavior became more refined, particularly through studies connected to advanced models of spacetime. By around 2020 research, these theories had developed further, offering more detailed predictions about how energy might behave under extreme conditions. Despite this progress, the original anomaly from 2012 data was not revisited publicly. It remained absent from major discussions, even as the tools to analyze such events improved. Then, after more than a decade, reports began to surface that the same researcher connected to the earlier findings had returned to active work. This time, the focus was not broad experimentation, but recreating the exact conditions that produced the original anomaly. The return to those specific parameters marked a shift. Instead of moving forward into new territory, the effort turned back to a single unresolved moment. Within facilities in Geneva labs, experiments began aligning with the earlier setup, using updated technology to capture more detailed results. The gap between initial discovery and renewed focus highlighted how certain findings can remain unresolved for years, only to re-emerge when the tools and understanding are advanced enough to revisit them directly. The return experiment. By 2026, researchers at CERN initiated a new phase of testing, this time focused on recreating the exact collision parameters from 2012. Instead of exploring new energy ranges, the goal was precision, matching the same conditions that produced the earlier anomaly. With upgrades to the Large Hadron Collider, scientists now had access to more advanced detection systems capable of capturing subtle energy behaviors that older instruments could not fully record. These new detectors were designed to track not just particle decay, but any irregular dispersal patterns that might have previously gone unnoticed. As the experiments progressed, early findings began to show familiar signs. Similar energy irregularities appeared under controlled conditions, but this time the signals were clearer and more consistent. Unlike the original event, which could be dismissed as experimental noise, the repeated patterns suggested something measurable. Reports linked to Geneva labs indicated that these anomalies followed the same structure as the earlier data, but with greater clarity due to improved instrumentation. This shifted the interpretation from a one-time occurrence to a repeatable phenomenon. The consistency across multiple trials reinforced the idea that the original event in 2012 data was not an isolated error, but part of a broader pattern that could be observed again under the right conditions. The disturbing interpretation. As the repeated results were analyzed, the interpretation began to extend beyond standard explanations. In theoretical physics, energy does not simply disappear, it transforms or transfers within defined systems. However, in these experiments, some energy appeared to behave in ways that suggested it was moving beyond measurable limits. Within discussions tied to 2026 models, this raised the possibility of energy interacting with structures not directly observable. The concept aligns with theories that propose additional dimensions beyond the familiar three-dimensional space. If energy can move across such boundaries, it implies a form of interaction rather than isolation. This does not suggest a physical opening in a traditional sense, but a condition where the limits of measurement are exceeded under extreme circumstances. Simulations influenced by advanced AI systems showed that repeated conditions could stabilize these interactions, making them more predictable over time. This shifts the anomaly from a rare occurrence to something that can be studied and potentially controlled. The implications remain grounded in theory, but the pattern itself is clear. The behavior observed is not fully explained by current models, yet it repeats under specific conditions. This places the focus on understanding how energy behaves at these extremes, and whether existing frameworks are sufficient to describe it. Why this changes everything. The findings tied to 2012 anomaly and the repeated signals in 2026 tests challenge one of the most stable assumptions in modern physics, that the universe operates as a closed system. At facilities like CERN, models have long assumed that energy remains within measurable boundaries, transforming but never leaving the system entirely. However, the observed behavior in high-energy collisions suggests that under extreme conditions, this assumption may not fully hold. The patterns seen in the Large Hadron Collider data indicate that some energy interactions extend beyond what current instruments can track. This connects directly to long-standing gaps in physics, including unexplained energy loss and the presence of dark matter. By 2020 research, scientists had already identified inconsistencies between predicted and observed energy levels in the universe. The anomaly observed during both experimental phases provides a potential link, suggesting that what appears as missing may not be missing at all, but interacting beyond observable limits. This doesn't confirm a new model, but it introduces a direction that existing theories have struggled to explain. At the same time, it expands the scale of what is being tested. High-energy experiments are no longer just about identifying particles, but about understanding how reality behaves under extreme pressure. The consistency of the repeated signals suggests that the phenomenon is not random. It follows conditions that can be recreated, which places it within the boundaries of scientific investigation. The shift is not in proving something new instantly, but in recognizing that the current framework may not fully describe everything being observed. The question no one can answer. As operations continue at CERN, the focus publicly remains on particle physics, with ongoing experiments pushing the limits of energy and precision. By 2026 operations, the Large Hadron Collider has reached new levels of performance, allowing researchers to explore conditions closer to theoretical extremes. Official statements continue to emphasize known goals, understanding fundamental particles and forces, without addressing broader interpretations tied to dimensional interaction. This keeps the narrative grounded in established science, even as unusual patterns persist in the data. What stands out is the sequence itself. In 2012 data, an anomaly appeared under specific conditions. Over the following years, it was not fully explained or revisited publicly. Then, after more than a decade, those same conditions were recreated intentionally, and similar results began to appear again. This repetition shifts the event from an isolated occurrence to a pattern that can be studied. It also shows that the focus is no longer accidental discovery, but controlled observation. The process reflects how complex findings are handled, measured, repeated, and analyzed over time rather than immediately defined. The data does not provide a final answer, but it establishes a consistent behavior under extreme conditions. This leaves the outcome open, not in speculation, but in ongoing investigation. What remains is a clear progression: an initial observation, a period of silence, and a return to the same conditions with improved tools and deeper analysis. The deeper these experiments go, the less stable the boundaries of reality begin to look. What started in 2012 at CERN as unexplained data is now being revisited in 2026 with greater precision and intent. The same patterns once ignored are appearing again inside the Large Hadron Collider, suggesting something consistent beneath the surface. The science remains careful, controlled, and incomplete, but the direction is clear. This is no longer about a single anomaly, but a repeatable behavior under extreme conditions. And whatever was first observed may now be closer to being fully understood than ever before.